Yeah.
It's very good.
Okay, so we're talking about the Jewish law and the history of Jewish law. Yesterday we did a very brief review of the Torah in the sense of how we learn Halakha from the Torah. Now, in about second or third century before the Common Era, people started, the rabbis started teaching the Torah in a method that is called Midrash Halakha. So, and we say Midrash Halakha, it's important to say Midrash Halakha, not just Midrash, because the way people understand today the word Midrash is mostly stories about the Torah, or stories that teach moral and ethical values, or biographies, etc. And the drasha of the rabbi in the synagogue is called, the speech is called a drasha. It's all it seems to be connected. But originally, the word midrash meant to search for, to seek out. As in we say, darash bishlomo. Drishat shalom is to seek, to know how the other person is doing. Or the Torah says, when you hear of a crime, v'ugad lecha, v'darashta v'shalta v'hakarta etev. You have, when you hear of something that was done, a criminal activity, you have to be doresh. It's basically an investigation, a research, a quest, an investigation. That's the meaning of the word darash. So when the rabbis used the term midrash halakha, what they meant was, we are going to be doresh, we are going to seek the meaning of the text in order to arrive at the conclusion of halakha. What is the halakha? So ideally, you start from the text, and then you arrive at the halakha. So
what's the word halakha?
No, so halakha is a word that the rabbis coined. They made the term halakha, and it comes from the verb halach, to walk. So, like the Torah says, "V'halachta b'drachav," you walk in the ways of Hashem. So, how do you walk in Hashem's way? By following the laws. So, it's a good question, because if you look at the terms that the Torah uses when it talks about law, it uses the word hukim, mishpatim, edot, mitzvot, torot. There are many different words in Hebrew. Hok is a law, and it comes from the concept of writing, because lahkok, lehokek is to engrave in stone. So it literally means etched in stone. So hok is something that is solid and unchangeable. Mishpat is also the word for shofet, and usually mishpat is understood more as a deliberation between two parties.
It's different.
Usually,
din.
Right. Usually, in financial situation, it would be mishpatim, and this comes from the word shafat, which has to do with leveling, with equalizing everything. So that's why we say tzedek tzedek tishpot. Betzedek tishpot amitecha. You should judge another person favorably. So that's mishpat. Then you have dinim. The word din is the verdict. Aidot is also a concept that you have to follow, but it is related to the word adut, testimony, and is understood as part of the covenant. So all these things are different, like synonyms that you find in the Torah. Maybe they have some difference in between them. There's another word that is used for religion or law, and that's the word dat. And actually, that's the word that most people use today in Hebrew. They say this person is dati, meaning religious. And it's not a Hebrew word; it's a Persian word, and it only appears in the Tanakh in Megillat Esther, Kedat HaMelech. It appears several times in Megillat Esther, which was written in the Persian period. And there's one place in the Torah that people think is related to the word dat, and that's in Parashat V'zot HaBeracha, Mimino Esh Dat Lamo. And it is separated to read Esh Dat, the fire of religion. But this is not, even though we read it like that, scholars of Hebrew language say this is not the case. It comes from the word Ashadot or Eshed, which means foundations, the foundations of Torah. In any case, so this is the source of the word halakha. So now that halach, to follow in the paths of Hashem. So when the rabbis worked on Midrash Halakha, what they did, they looked at the biblical text, and they derived halakha from it. And because of that, there's no Midrash Halakha on the book of Bereshit, because as I mentioned yesterday, there are no halachot in Bereshit. Also, on the first 12 chapters of Shemot, that are the narrative of Yetziat Mitzrayim and the plagues, there's no Midrash Halakha. It starts in chapter 12. And how does it work, Midrash Halakha? You read some words from the pasuk, from the text, and then you explain them. Like, what is the exact meaning? There are logical tools that the rabbis use to deduce, to come to a conclusion from the text. For example, if it says, if the Torah says, "V'shachatu oto kol kehal adat Yisrael ben ha'arbaim." Those are the first psukim that we have Midrash Halakha on, right? So the Torah says you have to take a lamb, take it from the 10th day, prepare the lamb, and Shahatu oto kol kehal adat Yisrael ben ha'arbaim. It will be slaughtered by all the congregation of the people of Israel ben ha'arbaim, between the evenings. That's ben ha'arbaim is sort of like twilight, but it's between the evenings. So now the Midrash Halakha will have to define what is exactly the word ben ha'arbaim, between that evening and that evening. Meaning it's the time that it starts getting dark, but it's not full darkness. When it says kol kehal adat Israel, all of the people, what does it mean? Does it mean only men, women also, children also? Then the Torah says, "Al tochelu mimenu na'u bashel mevushal b'mayim kim tzil yesh chosho al kerav al kirbo." Torah says, do not eat the meat raw or cooked. Rather, you have to eat it roast. So then the Midrash Halakha would say, what is the definition of roast? What if you roasted it on fire, but the top of the roast got burned by a clay vessel that got hot? The details like that. So the Midrash Halakha started deriving halachot from the Pesukim and organizing them. And so the way that you would sit and learn with your rabbi would be read the text of the Torah and then recite the text of Midrash Halakha, like text and commentary, text and commentary. And in this method, they studied for several hundred years until they had enough material, and there was always also new material, because sometimes there were traditions that evolved that they didn't know exactly where they came from. Sometimes also, that's the other extreme, they already had a tradition, but there was no source for it in the Torah. It was what we call the oral law. When Moshe received the Torah, he told people whatever was written, and the rest he explained orally. Now, after several hundred years, people ask, why do we do that? Where is it written? Not always the rabbis could show them in the text. So they did something that we call asmachta, meaning they just created something that looks as if it is the source, but it's not the source. It supports the practice, but it's not the source of the practice. In other words, instead of starting from the text and getting to the halakha, to the practice, you start from the practice and you trace it back into the text to make people feel comfortable, because they want to see a written source. So I give you an example for that. There's a story that happened in Europe where Jews used to own, to lease breweries from the local princes. Making beer, making vodka was a big deal, a big source of income, and usually the princes trusted the Jews to run that business. So one Pesach, a man comes to the rabbi to sell his hametz, and the rabbi says, "Okay, I see that you listed all of your hametz, but what about the beer in your brewery? You have big reserves of beer. You have to sell it because it's hametz." The man says, "No, what are you talking about? Beer is not hametz." The rabbi says, "What do you mean beer is not hametz? It is. It's made from barley." He says, "No, hametz is bread. That I understand. That looks like hametz. Beer is not hametz." And the rabbi says, "No, it is." It says, the man says, "Okay, show me in writing." So now the man can barely read. Is not very learned. The rabbi is, in order to show him, he has to open the book called Shulchan Aruch, which we'll talk about in the future, right? with the codex of Jewish law, and show him how the rabbi is deliberate regarding certain drinks, and say that even though there's no solid hametz in them, they still consider hametz. Like, this is going to take the whole day, and the rabbi himself has to search for hametz. What is he going to do? Then he had an idea. You know that in the Ashkenazi pronunciation, the bracha, the bracha that you say for burning the hametz, looking for the hametz, al bi'u hametz, but in the Ashkenazi pronunciation is al bir hametz. So he showed the man. He says, "Look at the siddur. Read this. What does it say? Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvois v'tzivuni al bir chometz." So, oh wow, yeah, I see beer. Now, obviously, that's not the source, right? But Haim was good. So, I mean, this is like some extreme example, but things like that happened also in the rabbinic period, which is about 2,000 years ago. People came to the rabbi and said, no, but Yiddish. Anyway, people would come to the rabbi and ask, why are we using on Sukkot an etrog? This is not even a fruit. The Torah says, Peri Eitz Hadar. They want to look at the text. The Torah says, Ulkahtem lachem, you should take Peri Eitz Hadar, the fruit of a glorious or of a beautiful tree. People came to the rabbi and says, well, this is not a fruit. It's not edible. People don't eat etrogim. I mean, you have to work hard to make jam and jelly from the etrog, right? But it's not a real fruit. The rabbi came with different explanations, but they knew that it's not really written in the text. If you start from the text and you use the methods of Midrash Halakha. Okay, so what does the text tell you? Take a fruit of a tree, right? Hadar, which means glory. So you have to look for trees that look glorious, look beautiful, and they have good fruits. So maybe it's an apple, maybe it's a pomegranate, right? How do you know it's an etrog? You really have no proof in the text. What do you rely on? Tradition. You rely on tradition. So you tell people, it's tradition. They say, no. I want to see a proof, right? So one rabbi came with a very creative proof. People in his period spoke Greek already. Greek was a common language. And in Greek, the word for water is hydro. We still have it in English, right? From Greek. Hydro. Good. Now, the etrog is a tree that requires a lot of water. And actually, you cannot spoil it with water. As much water that you could water it more and more, and the fruit will just grow bigger. If you ever saw a Yemenite etrog, this is something that you have to hold with two hands. They're huge etrogim. You don't shake the etrog shakes you. You hold it. So the rabbi told the man, and it's written in the Gemara, he says, etrog needs a lot of water, and water is hydro. Now if you take the consonants of hydro, H-D-R, there are the same consonants in the Hebrew word hadar. Now obviously the Torah did not tell people in Egypt to take a fruit that in order to find the name they have to know Greek. The language didn't exist yet. So obviously what we have here is a case where tradition was in place. The rabbis knew what to do, but the people questioned and they said, we want to know the source. And they had to make up some kind of a support, of a proof to show them that their tradition is based in text. But that's not all of Midrash. So there are different components of Midrash Halakha. Some of the elements of Midrash Halakha are already in the Torah. One of the most famous logical tools of Midrash Halakha is called Kal Vachomer. I'm going to give you to show you that we have used logical methods. What is a Kal Vachomer? Kal Vachomer is that it's called a fortiori, meaning if you apply a certain law in a certain case, and then you have a more severe case, definitely you'll apply the same law. For example, you say if someone, if a student in school, let's say, broke a piece of property, a marker, he'll have to pay for it. So obviously, if he broke a table, a desk, he'll have to pay for it, even if it was not officially stated. If the teacher said anyone who breaks a pencil or a pen will have to pay for it, and then a kid went and broke a table, and he said, "Oh, you didn't say that I can, break a pen." So obviously, it's included. But this kind of logical deduction is already mentioned in Tanakh, in the Torah. We have at least two examples. One is when the brothers of Yosef were accused by him that they stole the goblet. That's the second time that they come, and he tries to frame them, and he sends the goblet. He puts the goblet in the bag, and he comes and he says, "Why did you steal my master's goblet?" And what do they say? They say, "Halila la'avadecha me'asot kadavar hazeh." God forbid we will not do it. This is in Bereshit 44:7 and 8. And they say, "Hen kesef asher matzanu befi amtechotenu heshivonu elecha meretz Canaan ve'ech nignov mibet adonecha kesef o zahav." They say, how can you blame us that we're thieves? We found our money in our bags and we brought it back, even though we could have kept it. So obviously we wouldn't steal from you. But that's kind of a kal vachomer that depends on the opinion of people. He could have said it proves nothing. You did it so you could steal more, right? So there's another kal vachomer which appears in the book of Bamidbar, and that is after Miriam and Aharon spoke against Moshe, and they said, "We are also prophets." It's in chapter 12 in Bamidbar, in verse 14. Miriam was punished with leprosy, and Moshe prays to Hashem. He says, "El na'refanala, please heal her." God says, "Ve'avia hayarok yarag befanea, halot tikalem shiv'at yamim, tisager shiv'at yamim yichos ha'machane v'har te'asef." God says to Moshe, what would have happened if Miriam's father would have insulted her, would have shamed her publicly? She wouldn't leave the house for 7 days. So in this case that I shamed her, let her also stay quarantined for 7 days and then come in and then join the camp. Meaning she was sick or with leprosy for 7 days, or maybe he cured her right on the spot, but she still had to be quarantined for 7 days, and then they joined together. So from here we learn the concept of kal vachomer, of this kind of logical deduction, that if a certain law applies in one case, it will apply also in a more severe case. But we also learned another rule, it's called dayo leva min adin liot kelidon, which is that if I learn a punishment by such a method of kal vachomer, I cannot make the punishment more severe. So how do we see that? Because God says if she would be shamed by her father, she would stay home for 7 days. Now that I shamed her, she should also stay 7 days. Someone would have said, wait, being shamed by God is much worse than being shamed by your father, so maybe she had to stay quarantined for 1 month. And the answer is, as long as the punishment is not clearly stated, you limit it to what was the punishment in the original case. So those are some of the methods of Midrash Halakha. We say it every day at the end of the Korbanot. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, ב-13 מידות התורה נדרשת, מקל וחומר, מגזרה שווה. They're all the analytical tools that the rabbis used to parse and analyze the psukim. The interesting thing is that there were two main schools, that had some disagreement regarding how you analyze the text, and we'll talk about that tomorrow.